thanks for coming along to this. This is the second of the spectacles one. Remember, I did the first one before the mock for the back. Many of you were here for that. It was one where I focused on the inspector and the role of the inspector and what he might go through. This one is very much about using all the characters and looking at the characters and their roles in this. And I put on the thing that the idea here is that this is like a, as it says here, a didactic text. A phrase a lot of you have heard before, and unfortunately, a lot of you will attempt to write in the first line of your answer thinking it sounds good. It doesn't. The reason I'm putting it there is because it's part of my theory here, my thesis here, that the point of an inspector course is that it is a didactic text. It is there intended not to make us think like Macbeth or even arguably a Christmas Carol to a degree. It's there to teach us. It's there to give us moral instruction. It's there to tell us how to be, how to behave, how society should become. And so he uses the characters in their ways. Now, what you've got to remember is that these 6 characters, and I'm not including the inspectors, these 6 characters are all invented. I know it sounds a ridiculously obvious thing to say, but again, it's really, really important and really significant. They are. He sat down, he said, I want to write a play that gets this point across. He has to come up with a situation. Then he has to create these characters. They could have been anybody. Arthur could have been the father of the family. He could have been, you know, an upper class patriarch. He could have been somebody who was much more Gerald-like in that way. He could have made a different point through that. But he's chosen to make all of these in exactly the way they are, for what in particular reason. And this is, to me, at the heart of any character question you answer. So any of these come up, and of course one of them will in the summer, any of these come up, this, I think, is your starting point for a perceptive and thoughtful answer, a perceptive, thoughtful argument. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to argue that, first of all, whoops, went the wrong way. First of all, Arthur is created as the archetypal capitalist. That is the purpose of him. Priestley has taken the idea of capitalism as he sees it and puts it on stage. And please be aware, whenever I'm talking through this, anytime that I talk about the criticism of capitalism and all that kind of thing, I am talking about Priestley's argument, not mine, even if I agree with it. Anyway, Sybil is very, very clearly the middle class wife. That's very important. There are 2 aspects of her. She's middle class, bourgeoisie, if you like to use that term, and she is a wife. That defines her entirely. Gerald is the upper class man who therefore can do what he likes, because in this society, upper class men can do what they like. Okay? Eric is the disaffected young middle class man. And I'll go even further with that. The idea that he's disaffected comes very clearly from his parents. He's a disaffected young middle class man. Sheila represents the person who rebels against the expected path for a middle class woman, not at the beginning, but she does as it goes forward. And Eva represents the oppressed working class. Now, there is slightly more to them, but only to make those points. Only to make those points. That's what I am arguing with you here today. And I'm going to take you briefly through each of the 6 of those to argue that that is what he's trying to do and suggest what effect that has on the meaning of the play. So let's start on Arthur. He's created Arthur as an attack on capitalism. That's the entire point, isn't it? Okay? It is an attack on capitalism. Because really, I know there's comments about class. I know there's comments about the working class, particularly in the way they're treated. But I would say to you that this is his central point in the play. Priestley hates capitalism, sees it as what caused both wars. That's again my interpretation of it. And I think he shows it through Arthur. Think about certain things. First of all, the importance of Arthur's origins. I know they're not made absolutely clear, but the fact that he speaks, we're told very clearly he speaks in an accent. Yeah, okay. Immediately refers us to the idea that he is somebody from working class backgrounds. Okay, and therefore we're invited to see and surmise, I suppose, that he is somebody who has worked his way up from the lowest level through hard work, which is the image of capitalism, isn't it? The idea that through hard work, you can better yourself. And if you work and work and work, you can move up. And look what he's done. He ends up owning his own factory, owning his own business, a very successful one. So his origins are very, very important, as is the fact that he constantly adheres to the principles of capitalism, which are thrown in by Priestley in places that makes them look a little bit suspect. Like one of everyone's favourite quotes, certainly one of my favourite ones, when he talks about working for I always have to get it the right way around. Lower costs and higher prices. Yes, he states that is very clearly the objective of business. Lower costs, higher prices. The ability to charge more and pay less, so your profits are maximum. Say it like that, and it may not sound so bad. Priestley makes absolutely clear it comes over in the way that he sees it, which is lower costs mean paying workers less, exploiting other people. Higher prices means exploiting your customers by making them pay more than they need to. That's how he would see it. And throughout, he comes across with this idea, the hard-headed businessman, as he likes to call himself. Okay? Business is at the heart of everything that he does, even the marriage. Yet very, very importantly, he betrays those principles with Eva. Again, Priestley doesn't hide these things. He makes them very, very explicit. He describes Eva as a hard worker, as somebody who was due for promotion. We see that through the strike that she was a leader, had leadership qualities. Essentially, she has everything that you would desire in terms of promotion and moving up. And therefore, she is somebody who should be able to benefit from the capitalist path. He should be taking her on and saying, you are exactly the kind of person I need. And moving her up, moving her up, moving her up, so she becomes like him. But Priestley's point is that he betrays that. And he sacks her to save his own profits. So he doesn't even really believe in capitalism, or capitalism, in his mind, therefore, doesn't really believe in itself. Get yourself there, but it's all totally selfish. And this, of course, makes him potentially a class traitor. A lot of Marxism in here, and that will be a very, very the worst things to be in terms of a Marxist point of view. Somebody who betrays their own origins, because really he should know. He should know what Eva has gone through, what Eva is going through. He should understand it better than anybody. And I think when you look at that, to Priestley, that's one of the worst things. Now, this is something people who've heard me talk about this before will be very familiar with. But one thing I will always try and make clear is that when you look at this play, it is very, very obvious that Priestley hates Arthur more than any other character. And that's quite interesting, bearing in mind that you can certainly make an argument that what Arthur does to Eva is the least of everybody. I'm not saying it's true, but you can make that argument. You know, whenever I teach this, there's generally some people in the room who will always back him up and say, fair enough. He could sack her. Yet, at the end, when the inspector leaves, he turns on Arthur. Not the others, he warns the others, says, remember, 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 remember. And then he turns savagely on him and says, you started it. And really goes for him. It's very, very clear. He hates Arthur more than anything else. And I think the reason being that the betrayal of the class is what matters the most to him. The way that capitalism betrayed itself matters the most to him. I think it's just finished going round up there, if that's what you're looking for, the register. Anyway, double check. Okay. Sybil. Sybil, the restrictions of class. Okay. This to me is the key point that we're going for. You've got to remember with Sybil that she may do some awful things. She may be a repulsive person. But it's made very, very clear right from the start. I wouldn't say she has an excuse, but that she is a product of the class she comes from. First of all, in those opening stage directions, that description of her as a cold woman, right, suggests to us that the are you looking for the register? She's described at the beginning as a cold woman, which again straight away suggests all the humanity, all the heart has been pulled out of her. Okay, she doesn't have any humanity, right? Nothing at all. She's not really almost a functioning person, and this is because she's brought up to be like this. Her obsessions at the especially at the beginning of the play, but all the way through, are with people doing things the right way. Telling off Arthur for praising the cook, because that's not what you do, it's their job. Praising Gerald for doing his proposal the right way. That was very clever. Telling Sheila she has to get used to the role that she's going to have. She's brought up to be this way. And therefore, she's unable to see a different path. There is no possibility for her to understand things. And when she starts to slag off Eva later on, we see that that's just because that's what she thinks working class people are. They're a different breed. They're a different race to her. She doesn't get them. Her role is purely to be a wife in this kind of society. So, for example, we have her expectations of Sheila. We just mentioned there. Sheila's just going to be her. And she doesn't cope anytime Sheila doesn't fall into those to her expected behaviour. That's why she's constantly having to go at Sheila. So as it goes on, the class restrictions that there are, they keep her down, keep her from growing as a person. She doesn't have the opportunity and the understanding and the knowledge that Arthur should have to be able to get what Eva's doing. And this comes out as well in her attitude towards her own gender. She is by no means any kind of feminist. In fact, quite the opposite. She repeatedly refers to men as in charge. She says that Arthur will sort things out at the end. She says to everyone, be quiet and wait and let your father tell us what we've got to do. And then she looks expectantly at him, waiting for him to pronounce. Elsewhere, when she's told that Eric is a drinker and she doesn't want to believe it, she's told it by Sheila. She doesn't believe her own daughter. She turns to Gerald and says, you know him and you're a man. And then asks him if it's true or not. With that qualification, you're a man, so you must know. She has no understanding of her gender in any other role because she's brought up that way. And I think that's what essentially Priestley is trying to say to her. That's why he's not so savage on her as he is on Arthur. She shows us that women in the middle class have nothing, have no life. Now, don't for a second think that Priestley is trying to make some better feminist point here. I don't think that's remotely the case here. I don't think Priestley, if you look close at this, is anything close to a feminist. Some of his treatment of other people is not great, but certainly we're seeing her as restricted by that role. Now, what about Gerald? Well, the point he's trying to make here is the dangers of class attitudes, the dangers of these people. Remember, Gerald is essentially upper class. His parents, a lord and lady Grubb, they are very, very well-off people. They don't want to mix with the Burlings and don't want him to marry them. So what do we get? We get, first of all, he's charming, he's polite. We said it all the way around. Let's, when you go back and revise and reread Inspector Calls, seriously, notice how charming and polite and nice Gerald comes across as. Regularly, he will respond. Even the inspector comes back and says something, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I suppose so. I suppose you're right." He's constant. He's a really, really charming person to go to. But he's also described at the beginning as this man about town, which is pretty much shorthand. Socialite, isn't it? It's somebody who likes to get out in the town and enjoy himself. Won't quite go as far as, in modern parlance, a player, but it's not far off. That's what we're told about him. When he speaks, he's quite quiet, isn't he? He's understated. He doesn't show himself off to everybody. Like one of the ones I always think shows a really good difference between him and Arthur is when everybody leaves at the beginning and they're left together, and Arthur pulls out a big cigar, and Arthur's like, Gerald, of course, Gerald's and gets out a cigarette and says, "Well, it's your difference. Arthur, new wealth, likes to show it off. Big fat cigar. Look at me. Look at me." Gerald wouldn't touch much. Just gentle, understated, doing things that way. So that's the impression we get of him here. However, as I said to you, the danger of these class attitudes, he might be a very nice man under 30, he might be very charming and very pleasant. But look at the details in his story. First of all, think about this whole thing about the palace bar. Okay, so he tells the story. He says that in the palace bar, he'd gone there because he'd gone to a play that wasn't very good one night after work, and so he'd gone down for a drink. Okay, or a show that wasn't very good. This is a play itself. They don't have to tell the truth. Do we believe him? He knows it's a hangout for prostitutes. He says it himself. And he seems quite comfortable being there. Personally, I always think the underlying idea is, let's be honest, he's been there before. Quite a number of times. That's always the way I look at it. But what's probably more disturbing about this is the way he talks about the prostitutes in the bar. It can seem on one level he's very, very good to Eva. And certainly when we think about the way he treats her, he can be seen, like Sheila says, as a kind of a knight in shining armour, coming out and showing everybody, saying, "Look, I helped her, I saved her, I did whatever." But when you look at what he says, you see that the only reason he ever got involved in her in the first place was because she was pretty and fresh. Oh, that's creepy. Fresh. She looked fresh. And the fact that she didn't belong there. So he then thought, "Oh, interesting." He talks about the other prostitutes and he says he hates them. Exact phrase, remember. "I hate them." Why? The prostitute? Really? Well, he says, "I hate those hard-eyed, dough-faced women." So maybe he hates them because they're ugly. And of course, they're kind of ugly because they live in a pretty awful life. It's people like him. But that's a secondary part to it. You see the point? Listen to that phrasing, that language, and what he's saying there. And there's an undercurrent. He can make judgment on anybody else, and he can step in like he does with Eva and do what he likes. Now, let's make this absolutely clear here. There's a big difference, or a difference at least, between what I think Priestley is trying to say to us and show us and what we see as a modern audience here. I think Priestley is trying to show to us that essentially his treatment of Eva is somebody who really didn't pay much attention to what he did. Essentially, in the end, it was inconvenient to him, and so he had to drop it. And he does genuinely feel upset about her. And when the inspector leaves, remember the inspector says, "Oh, you know, well, that Gerald, that croc boy, at least he made her happy for a time." So I don't think that, you know, Priestley is trying to make Gerald sound particularly bad. The trouble is, we're not living in 1946, and we are Priestley. And so we see it a different way. Okay? And that's fine as long as you see the difference between them. We see a man who picks up this girl, who's pretty and fresh, and says, "I tell you what, I'll take you off and give you a nice food, nice meal. Oh, I know where'll be open. A hotel." Then says, "I tell you what, I'll look after you. I'll put you up and I'll get some rooms for you so you can live all nicely and whatever." These, of course, being rooms that he's not paying anything for. He's looking after for a friend of his. So he has them on the side. So basically, he's looking after these rooms for a friend of his. So he thinks, "Oh, I'll put her up in there." And why does it all end? It all ends because his friend is coming back, and so he has to give the keys back. So rather than, as a very rich man, go, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll keep paying for a place for you. Let's move you into somewhere. I'll find some rooms for you and look after you." No, has to end. Has to end because I have to give the keys back. Doesn't sound particularly great to us, does it? And that's not to mention his whole mention of that phrase when asked if she became your mistress. He said, "Well, yes, I suppose it was inevitable." Sorry for repeating myself for people who've heard this before, but yeah, it was inevitable. No, it wasn't inevitable. It's quite straightforward. All you had to do was not take your trousers off. Right? That's not inevitable. It's an easy excuse. So I think Priestley's point is that he feels he can do what he likes and therefore ends up exploiting her even when he thinks he's doing something good. I think our point is, oh my God, what an awful man. Now, of course, to add to that, don't forget Act 3. Very, very important. When Gerald leaves during Act 2, he walks out in that kind of very understated way, saying, "Oh, I'm afraid I'm a bit more upset than I thought, and you might think I am, and I just need a bit of a walk. I hope I can come back." And you know, Sheila says to him, "I don't hate you as much as I did before." Here's the ring back, and he goes, "Oh, I expected that." And when she says, "You know, the main thing is we have to get to know each other again," and all that, he goes, you know, and Arthur comes and kicks his face in and goes, "Oh, well, I don't want to make excuses for him." And he goes, "No, I understand. I get it. I understand. I do get it." And it seems when he leaves, it's all a bit sad. But then remember, he comes back in the middle of Act 3, and he's found out that this isn't a real police officer, and then boom, all of that goes. All of that goes. There's no more niceness. He doesn't show any more regret or sadness about Eva and what happened. And of course, famously at the end, he tries to give Sheila the ring back, even though he is well aware that he did everything that he said. He had this affair, he kept this woman, he kept it from Sheila. But because the woman's dead, he thinks he can give it back to her. So don't forget that when you're talking about Gerald, how he comes in Act 3. Moving on, we're nearly there. Eric. There's so long in this because Eric is not going to come up this year because he came up last. But it can come up in other ideas. I think the point he's making with Eric is how basically class corrupts him. He has been corrupted by his parents. The way that they brought him up, treated him, he has fallen apart. At the beginning of the play, he's nothing. He's half shy, half assertive. He doesn't know who he is. Half the time he's not comfortable, half the time he's overconfident. He's had a very clear, privileged upbringing. His father mentions he went to private school, to public school, and then to Oxford or Cambridge. And of course, calls him spoiled. Makes no sense considering he was the one who sent him there in the first place. But he has had this very privileged upbringing, yet He's drunk and he hates himself, quite clearly. He has all the privilege, but he hates himself and drinks himself into oblivion. I remember at the beginning of the play, Priestley kind of makes him the most mysterious character. He's back to us at the rise of the curtain. He doesn't say a huge amount at the beginning, right? Don't ever get it wrong. Lots of people get Eric very, very wrong, start talking about the fact that, oh, he doesn't criticise his dad at all at the beginning. Believe you me, I've seen many, many answers to say this. Of course, that's rubbish. He spent half the time criticising his dad, or certainly going against him. In fact, you might well argue that under the surface here, he might hate himself, he might be drunk or whatever. He actually shows quite a bit of interest and quite a bit of promise. Whereas Sheila, who we go on to in a second, what we see is before she finds out what she did, she shows a concern and a care for working class people. Oh, you know, they're young, they're not cheap labor, they're people. He shows a different approach to business. His point that he keeps making, he says, well, I don't think it's fair. They want higher prices, higher wages, so, or we charge higher prices to me, so why shouldn't they charge higher wages? He just sees business differently. He's right about the war. He's right in seeing it coming. He's got much more foresight than his father had. So there is something to him. There's something underneath. It's just the way that he's been brought up there. And therefore, that's where his behaviour comes. Now, this is another situation. Another situation where Priestley's impression is probably very different from ours. Priestley shows his behaviour to be childish and silly and, you know, irresponsible. But when we bring up the rape word, I don't think Priestley really even views it that way personally. I think Priestley basically just thinks, oh yeah, he put himself in a situation, used his power to his advantage. But once we see it that way, it's almost impossible ever to forgive Eric and see him as a good character. Because that's unforgivable, what he does. Yeah. So I think there's a bit of a gap and a distance. I think that essentially Eric naturally holds sympathy with Priestley's ideals. And what he's showing is that people from this class are destroyed by their Victorian parents, but actually have much more going on under the surface, have a more natural hope here. And that allows him to take us to Sheila. Go up, boys. Sheila, who he's showing us as the hope of the future. Okay? Yes, she might be trying to be pushed into something else. She starts off in that very simple way. I'm not sure I go with that phrase that is overused about Sheila at the beginning of being immature at the beginning. I'm not sure she is immature. There's more going on behind her. Yes, she's pleased with life. Yes, she's apparently happy she's going to get engaged. And yes, I think she genuinely loves Gerald at the beginning. They have moments that suggest that. But don't forget, right at the beginning, right from the second page, there are early signs of something different being about her. Right from that whole bit where Gerald, you know, starts, if you remember, Arthur says, you know, I want to treat Gerald like one of the family. I insist on treating him like one of the family. Gerald says, great, I've been trying long enough, after all, which is a bit of a loaded phrase anyway, okay? Suggesting that he's asked and been turned down quite a few times by Sheila. Anyway, I've been trying long enough, haven't I? She doesn't answer when he asks her that. Then he has to ask it again. Signs of something more going on. And that leads into then his whole thing of, her whole thing of, you didn't come near me last summer. That whole idea that, you know, I'm still holding on to that, half serious, half playful. There's something dodgy about it. And again, that's also a part of Mrs. Burling, in the bit that we said before, saying to us, saying to Sheila, you've got to behave, you know, you've got to accept another one of the men. Men with important work to do just have to go off and spend time doing this. And Sheila quite clearly says, I don't think I will get used to it. Straight away, I'm not going to do that. This is along with what anything else happens. It's all about the second, third page. I'm not going to do that. That's not my future. I'm not just going to let you go away and do what you want. So we get signs of that coming in to begin with, and there's a few other in there as well. It's worth remembering the reasons behind her behaviour towards Eva. She's very candid about it. I was in a bad mood. That's what she says. I was in a bad mood. I was angry and I took it out on her. And even though it's not made very clear, you always get the feeling that, as we know it was Mrs. Burling with her, Sybil with her, that it probably was Sybil's fault. But again, we don't really have the evidence to say that for sure. But there is a reason behind it. What she then ends up doing is going to default mode. Basically turning around and being, you know, like, who I am, that kind of an idea. Yet straight away, she takes responsibility for it. Great thing with Sheila is to compare her with Eva. It's made very, very clear they're about the same age. They're both described in very similar ways as pretty. They are the same person, but for privilege. Sheila is Eva if she'd been born into the middle class. Eva is Sheila if she hadn't had any privilege before. They're both strong and a bit feisty. Okay. It works very, very well. And then at the same time, she's a complete contrast with her mother. She doesn't accept men behaving in that way, even right from the start. She doesn't just want to live and be the middle class wife. Okay. The three women in the play, their interaction is very, very important. And the final thing that's very important about her is that what we see with her is that she understands. She doesn't just listen all the way through to what goes on. She understands. She stays after her thing, listens to everybody else is happy, but she understands the point. She's the first person to understand that the inspector is talking about Eric at the end of Act 2. She gets it far more ahead than the rest of them. And that's probably the most important thing about her. So she's kind of saying to us, remember, his audience at his play, it's the theatre. The theatre is not a working class activity, certainly at this stage, right? He is not talking to Eva's, he's talking to Sheila's, right? In fact, if you think about the gap, probably he's talking to children of Sheila, right? People whose mother would have been Sheila. And so he's basically saying, look, this is the way it's been going. Keep it going. Keep it going. Forget those horrible grandparents of yours. And that brings us lastly to Eva, the victim of class and capitalism. As we said before, she's a hard worker. She's blatantly, obviously intelligent. That comes up repeatedly through these, that she understands what's going on. She's repeatedly described as attractive. Probably most importantly, she's moral. Number of opportunities in which she appears to be the most moral character in the play. And it's a thing that above all else Sybil can't accept. She cannot understand anybody who is desperate could actually maintain a moral point of view. And remember, Sybil trying to present herself as moral to everybody. She judges everybody in morality. Remember that whole thing with Gerald is disgusting, your affair. Yes. Tell her a big lie. One of the big things against Eva is she said she was lying completely about everything. And remember, it's only about 3 pages after she blatantly lies herself. She can't cope. Her moral compass is all over the place. She thinks she's moral and she's not, Sybil. Eva is moral. Every decision she makes is moral. Even with Gerald, she tries to turn down stuff from him. She tries not to reveal stuff about herself. Okay? With Eric, she turns down a marriage that would have set her up for life because it's ridiculous and the wrong thing to do. She refuses stolen money because it's the wrong thing to do. Priestley is setting her up to be, she's almost the same, isn't she? Okay? Absolutely taking the right thing because she's working class. And therefore, the only thing that causes the problem for her is the class and corrupt and capitalist other people around her. So there's our characters. There's hopefully a summary of what I think is the purpose behind them. And I think that's a great way to come at them. If you're asked about how Sheila changes across the novel, okay, then you can come at it from the point of view of why she changes across the novel, why Priestley is doing this, why he sets it up. If you're asked about Sybil being unpleasant or a character that we dislike or anything like that, you can come at the point of view of yes, but. And there is one other thing with Sybil, just to remember the last little thing. And I do think Sybil is a very strong possibility to come up with some. One little thing you can just go on with Sybil to tell it, which is the most interesting thing. She is this cold automaton, you know, who just doesn't really respond to humanity. Except for one moment when she finds out it's Eric that's responsible for this. You look at it. And the one thing Sybil always had is control of her language. She can talk. She can talk anybody into the ground. And she loses control of her language. She can't speak. She can't form sentences. She can't cope. She loves her son. An interesting little element that takes you just Sybil a little bit deeper if you can't have it. Okay, thanks very much. In a few weeks' time, we've got another one coming up, and we'll see you hopefully then as well.
You want me to sign these for you, sir?
Yeah, it'd be great actually.